our keynote of the afternoon, and another energy god, Glenn Garland.
Thank you, Andres.
Thank you, Glenn. Thank you very much.
So if I could get my guitar up on, no? You're not letting me sing, okay. As Andres said, I've been fortunate to spend the last 20 plus years. I think when you reach a certain point in your career, it's plus years. 20 plus years actually in energy efficiency. And I didn't get into the industry by accident. I actually thought about in the mid-'80s when I got out of college, what are the major issues in my lifetime? And I said energy and healthcare I thought were going to be the two major issues. And as we sit here today, I still think energy is one of the primary drivers, certainly drives not only our domestic policy, but as well as a lot of our international policy. And we just think there are ways to do it better, and that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. There are a lot of things that Texas leads the country in. Obviously, football is very big. Compact vehicles, as you can see, that we certainly have made a mark. Television sets, and great barbecue. But one of the things that Texas doesn't lead the nation in is really utility-funded energy efficiency programs. We barely make the top 10 list. And if we look at, we squeaked by Washington State, but if you go down this list, you see some interesting things. And I've heard the discussion that, look, we have competitive retail markets. Well, you know what? So does Pennsylvania, and so does New York. And in a lot of areas, Massachusetts has some competitive markets, and they still find ways to make the investment in energy efficiency, whereas we do not. And if you look at where California is in terms of utility-funded energy efficiency programs, they're way out in front. They're leaving us behind in a number of areas. And as we look at this investment overall in energy efficiency, one of the things that is really striking in this is that energy efficiency is one of the most cost-effective sources of supply that we have. Energy efficiency, by law, in every state has to be more cost competitive than the generation alternative. So energy efficiency, we bring in at 2 to 4 cents compared to combined cycle, which comes in anywhere from 6 to 10 cents, depending on the geography and the area of the country. And what's interesting, people ask, why don't we focus more on that? There's a lot of focus nationally about the rate at which we pay for energy as opposed to the total bill. And in Texas, that seems to be one of the preoccupations that we have right now, is that, that portion of the bill may be larger, whereas if we were focused really on how much consumers are actually paying, we could bring down their total bill even at a higher rate. And I hear a lot about, we have to build new generation. Why? There are a number of states that have managed to be very successful without building new generation and building their way out of it. And they said, it's a Texas mentality, that we have to grow, we have to expand. Great. Let's do it in a way that makes great economic sense. As we look at some of the issues facing Texas, how to sustain business growth as we look at the population expansion that we're expecting over the next 25 years. If we think about water, and you may ask, what does water have to do with energy? And I'll talk about that in a minute. Well, also one of the major impacts that not only Texas is facing, but a lot of states, is the Clean Power Plan proposed by EPA, otherwise known as EPA's Rule 111D. That's going to play a major impact in how we think about energy and generation sources going forward. And energy efficiency is one of the alternatives proposed by EPA to meet the proposed standards. So, we talk about job creation. I noticed that, if you've been following the news the last few weeks, Tesla announced that they're building their gigafactory in Nevada. 6,400 full-time jobs but they wanted at least $400 million in tax abatements. So $400 million going to create 6,400 permanent jobs. But as I look here, from 2009 to 2013, just in energy efficiency in Texas, we've created over 21,000 jobs that had an economic impact of over $2.5 billion to the state and generated taxes of $279 million. What if we invested on the same rate as just the U.S. average? During that same time period, we could have generated over 51,000 jobs. That's over 8 times what Tesla's talking about with a more positive economic impact, $6 billion. Would we like to see a $6 billion positive impact to the state? I think that'd be great. But if we invested at the highest rate at which states like California and Massachusetts and New York are doing, we could generate over 100,000 jobs in energy efficiency with an economic impact exceeding $12 billion. That's what we're talking about here. It's not just that it's better for the air, it's better for the environment. We're talking about real jobs that improve the tax base. As we look, obviously our pro-business policies are working, but there are some challenges for Texas going forward to be able to sustain the amount of growth. We're projecting that over the next 25 years, we're going to grow another 40%. Those of you that have driven around town in the last couple of years, you know what traffic was like 10 years ago. You know what it's like today. Can you imagine what it's going to be like in 20 years? You know what water rationing that we've had to go through over the last several years. Can you imagine what that's going to be like at 20 years if the current drought continues at its current rate? We can't continue to build our way out of situations. We have to be more efficient in how we build our infrastructure. And for perspective, we're not having a lot of new generation being built. With natural gas prices low right now, it is just not as attractive in the speculative market to build power plants. So we're not seeing the merchant fleet, they're not being built in Texas. They're being built elsewhere where they think they can get a better return, but it's not. If we continue at our current pace, we won't have enough power to meet the 2018 forecasted load, so we have to think differently. So we talked a little bit about water, and one of the things that I wanted to say is that it's created an obvious strain. There have been several industries that have decided not to relocate into Texas because they understand the water scarcity issue. Energy efficiency can help reduce that strain. Water to cool electric turbines is the 3rd largest use of energy in Texas today, behind water for agriculture and water for hydraulic fracking. The 3rd largest use is in power generation. And it costs a lot of money to move not only water around, but for every 10% of electricity, if Texas were to save 10% over our current electric use, that would provide enough water for Austin for 2.5 years. That's pretty significant when we think about what our growth has been. EPA's 111D, we spoke a little bit earlier about that, it's going to have a tremendous impact. The carbon rules are going to require Texas to reduce carbon emissions by at least 40%. We can either do that by having more efficient generation, but one of the other options that's available to us is to look at energy efficiency as a source of fuel. A lot of market potential studies have been done on Texas, and depending who you read, anywhere from 20 to 40% of our current peak demand could be met through energy efficiency, very cost effectively. And those emission reductions would give current generators some flexibility in how they choose to meet their demands. Again, energy efficiency, by law, has to be more cost effective than the alternative. So in order for us to continue our growth, we think that energy efficiency is an essential tool in the process. I think it's incumbent upon us to really look as we go into the next legislative session to take steps now to really bolster not only our standing in what we do in energy efficiency, but to really solve some of the problems that Texas is going to face going forward. And we need to think about some of the recovery models right now. There seems to be a punitive aspect in our regulatory framework that de-incentivizes utilities for making the investments to sell less of their product. And under the current regulatory framework, I think we need to start rethinking how that's done. If we want to have the outcome that we want 20 to 30 years from now, we've got to put policies into place now. A little bit about us. At CLEAResult, our business is really working with utilities to help their customer base become more energy efficient. We have 47 offices across North America. As I was sharing with Andres earlier, we spent a great deal of our time flying under the radar screen because we didn't want our competitors to know how successful we had become. We now have over 190 utility clients that we work with. Most are the large investor-owned utilities. As we sit here today, we have about 1,550 employees, and as of Monday or Tuesday, that will be a number much larger, but that's all I can say about that. But energy efficiency and renewable energy has been really our sole focus. And our business model has been built on what we've learned over the last 20 years, which is some of the barriers to energy efficiency haven't changed much. People don't know what to install. They don't know, in a lot of cases, what being efficient actually means, so they have difficulty benchmarking, whether you're a school or whether you're a homeowner, knowing exactly where you compare, how to hire a contractor, what are the right products and services that I should install. And we take a very vendor-neutral, product-neutral approach, trying to impart the best information that we can to customers. So with that, I will close, and thank you all for your time.
My question is, I think there's something missing in the public domain that needs to be perhaps some sort of public education or public outreach to bring the difference between conservation and efficiency. I think they really need to kind of stand alone as separate concepts, so people think, oh yeah, efficiency is great, but what about, saving and conserving or having better habits like doing loads at night for laundry and things like that?
No, it's a great point. I mean, one of the things that we learned years ago, at least folks of my generation, some of you are much younger, but you remember, anybody remembers when Jimmy Carter was president, he did his fireside chat. So he talked about turning down the thermostat, and he sat with a real puffy sweater on. And what he said is, you got to be really uncomfortable in order to save energy. And that was sort of the message that was communicated visually. And the point that's being made is energy efficiency, we're not talking about necessarily conservation. We're talking about having the same or better comfort at a much reduced cost. And that's one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking to building owners about, that you can actually make your buildings more comfortable. You can meet your needs much easier at a much lower cost. And a lot of times they're just trade-offs in what's being done. And this gets back to that knowledge gap. And some states do a really good job of focusing on an education campaign. When the Texas markets deregulated, there was going to be about $35 to $50 million spent on a statewide campaign annually to talk about how to use energy more efficiently, and that was one of the first things that got killed after deregulation. So, but there is quite an advantage in making sure that consumers know.
I have a question, Glenn. So we have had some great conversations this morning in different, the utility of the future, and there's all these things going on, transformations about smart grid, and we heard about electric vehicles and the nexus of water and energy. And you're an expert as an insider, and now as an outsider helping the energy efficiency transformation in the country. What do you see the posture of the utilities around all these challenges? Clearly, they need to do more energy efficiency, but maybe they don't want to because they want to sell kilowatt hours. But solar panels, electric vehicles, what do you think are the things that utilities are not doing that they should be doing? What do you see in that transformation from your perspective?
Wow. one of the things that I think is utilities going forward, utilities, if you look at most of the executive structure in most of the utilities, most of them came up through the finance side, which was, financing power plants, building power plants. You're seeing a shift in a lot of utilities going towards, actually, the most valuable commodity that we have is not our power plants, it is our customers. We have a unique relationship with those customers that other disruptive technology, solar has been very disruptive, EV presents a huge opportunity for them, but as they're looking going forward, they're trying to determine the value of ownership of the customer and what that means, and giving the customers choice in how to do that. The problem, both for the utilities, has been they move more slowly in a lot of utilities, and the regulatory structure de-incentivizes them to make some of these changes, which is why we've talked a lot about the regulatory models that we currently have, in a lot of ways, have to be scrapped and redrawn up in order to actually get the outcome that we want going forward. But the utilities are recognizing some have been very aggressive and have really gone after owning the customer. The utilities, if you look at the top 10 investor-owned utilities in customer satisfaction, you will find a mirror image into the top 10 utilities that get their highest return on equity. There is a direct relationship between improving the customer experience, improving customer satisfaction, and giving choices, and the utilities actually make more money in the process. But it's harder. It requires more work. And some of the utilities are really aggressively going after that, and you see some of the acquisitions in the space. But I think going forward, utility understanding, and there are a lot of people that talk about the utility death spiral, and I candidly don't buy into it. I think at least for the next 50 years, reliability is still going to be one of the cornerstones. I read, former FERC Commissioner John Wellinghoff's commentary that, we ought to just, scrap the utilities and, go to, smaller grids. I'm not a subscriber to that. The utility still, if you look at, how customers make decisions and the influence in those decisions, utilities still have a very significant role in changing customer behavior and driving customer behavior.
I want to get your thoughts on where the marketplace is going around behavioral energy efficiency and all the new database decision-making side of things that goes beyond just changing equipment and accessing financing and so forth, but changing people's daily behaviors. Where do you see the marketplace headed?
So, can everybody hear the question okay? Okay. The question was really, what is the role in data and behavioral, and how is that influencing behavior by customers? And one of the things that I think you see, big data has had a lot of great aspects to it. I was I was hypothesizing this morning, as we look 40 years out into the future, will we have enough big data that can tell me, somebody once said, for our political leaders, how can I tell when they're lying or deceiving me? And somebody else said, by the way they're talking. But I do think that by and large people do that. But, we'll probably be able to predict a lot of human behavior through big data in the future. But excuse me for that little tangential comment. But data has been huge in driving the decisions that homeowners make, in driving the decisions that business owners make in how they invest in their business. A perfect example that I like to use is we had a school district, a very large school district in the state that we worked with some years ago, and their perception was we are in the upper tier of performance around energy. Look at all the things that we've done. And what we found was they're not in the top 5%, they were in the bottom 5%. The data didn't lie. They actually hired an engineering firm to challenge our data. And when the engineering got through, it says, you're right, you're absolutely in the bottom. And coincidentally, this particular school district, after they benchmarked that, they started benchmarking their maintenance, their custodial, all the aspects of their operations. And I remember asking the assistant superintendent of finance about 6 months after, I said, what did the data tell you? He said, we suck at everything. But true story. But the amazing thing is that within 3 years, they were in the top 10%. They made it a priority. They reallocated funding. They looked at their processes. So data really drove their policies and priorities. And it does the same thing. That's at a macro level, but it does the same thing at the individual level. You know, I put solar on my house. I happen to have a swimming pool. I saw, you know, wow, my pool pumps are coming on about 2 hours before sunrise. If I actually stagger the time, then I get some free pool pumping. So, you know, there are a lot of decisions you can make, but it's just having the data to do that. Utilities are installing advanced meters which give us that capability, but in a lot of ways they're not giving us the tools to really access that data. And I think that's what you're going to see more and more.
Yeah, we heard this morning that from the discussion on utility and rates that the essential cost structure of an electric power system is largely fixed costs, relatively lower variable cost, and yet there's this big disconnect in that we're still, our electricity pricing is still volumetric. We have a cents per kilowatt hour, okay, but it's changing. And some of the more innovative utilities are moving toward more and more of the price of electricity being a fixed cost per month, regardless of how much you use. And even some are giving it away for free nights and weekends, I believe. So that's the preface to the question. The question, of course, is assuming that this trend continues and accelerates, what is that going to mean for providing an incentive for folks to conserve? Why should they conserve if it's going to cost them the same fixed price, whether they use more or less?
Well, the short answer would be that they wouldn't conserve if those were the only factors involved. Obviously, when we got, you know, unlimited minutes on cell phones, our cell phone use has increased exponentially. When we got free data, our data increased exponentially, and we found a lot of uses. We do have some constraining factors, and I mentioned a couple of those earlier. If we had 100% clean power, I don't think anybody would have an aversion to unlimited data or unlimited energy use. That's not the situation that we live in right now. There are real constraints that we have to. It's not the difference between just putting up a tower. We have to run wires. Those wires can only handle so much load. We have generation that emits, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and other things that we don't particularly want to breathe. And having lived, downwind from a very large generating station for a number of years, I can tell you about the effects of that firsthand in trips to the emergency room for my sons with asthma, who no longer have asthma once we moved. So there are direct impacts, and those societal costs show up somewhere. We have a lot of people argue that we can just build whatever generation we want wherever we want that doesn't have any impacts. And if you do a map and see the medical costs of, especially in our high population areas in Dallas and Houston and other markets, and you look at the peak days and you look at the incidence of asthma and other respiratory related incidents in the emergency rooms in those hospitals, you'll find there's a direct correlation between the two. So, can you give away free power? If you're a retailer, maybe not. Maybe you can do it as a great way. I just see that we have water issues and we have emissions issues that are going to have to be addressed. Absent addressing those, I have no problem with free energy if we have better sources and cleaner sources.
Is that it? No more questions? How about a round of applause for Glenn Garland? Glenn?